I invite you to listen to my new dramatic story about military honor, betrayal, and righteous retribution on the Purple Heart Stories channel. I'm sure you won't be disappointed, and please support with a like and subscription if you enjoy it. Hourglass. Chapter 1. My name is Eric Stone. I'm 38 years old and I recently found out that I'm terminally ill. Or at least that's what I was told. 15 years in special forces taught me many things. How to survive in the desert with just a knife, how to kill a person in 16 different ways, how not to break under torture. But now I have a new enemy, time, and possibly a couple more enemies of flesh and blood. Dr. Rhodes' office resembled an expensive hotel room more than a hospital facility. Soft leather armchairs, works of art on the walls, subdued lighting, tastelessness for those who mistake money for meaning. I sat across from him while he flipped through my chart, deliberately slowly, as if measuring each second of his presentation. "Mr. Stone," he raised his eyes and removed his thin gold-rimmed glasses. "I'm afraid the news isn't the best." Maria squeezed my hand tightly, too tightly. In such moments people usually instinctively seek contact, but for me, the world slowed down and separated into components, like before a capture operation. Smell, Rhodes' light cologne mingled with the scent of antiseptic. Sound, the air conditioner running at minimum power, creating a barely noticeable background noise. Tactile sensations, Maria's hand felt like sandpaper. "What's the prognosis?" I asked, not wasting time on unnecessary words. Rhodes paused, a theatrical pause from a man accustomed to the drama of his profession. "Progressive neuroimmune myelopathy, a rare autoimmune disease where your body attacks its own nervous system. It begins with the peripheral nerves and—" "Time, doctor, how long do I have left?" Something flashed in Rhodes' eyes, irritation. He wasn't used to being deprived of the opportunity to deliver an impressive medical speech. "About 12 months, perhaps a bit longer with aggressive therapy." 12 months, Maria sobbed, pressing against my shoulder. Strangely, I didn't feel shock. In Fallujah, we once came under mortar fire. The house where my unit was sheltering collapsed like a house of cards. 2 of my men died instantly. I remember that crystal clarity when dust and smoke mixed and time stretched into infinity. It was the same feeling now. "What are the symptoms? How will it happen?" I asked with the same intonation I usually used when requesting intelligence data before a mission. Rhodes smiled, a strange, professional smile that he must have practiced in front of a mirror. "In the beginning, there will be headaches, dizziness, weakness. Then loss of sensation in the extremities, coordination problems. In the final stage, partial paralysis, breathing difficulties, cognitive impairment." "So I'll die slowly and ungracefully," I interrupted him. "Eric," Maria scolded me. But something in her voice sounded false. Not genuine indignation, but an imitation of it, as if she was playing the role of a caring wife for an audience. "Yes, Mr. Stone, of course, we can alleviate the symptoms. There's experimental therapy." "No." "Excuse me." "No therapy, no hospitals. If I have 12 months left, I won't spend them here." Rhodes and Maria exchanged quick glances. I almost missed it, a tiny moment of silent communication. "Eric, darling, you need treatment," Maria spoke in a tone used with a disobedient child. "Need? Who says I need it?" I turned to her. "I've been through 5 circles of hell, and if I'm about to go through a 6th, it won't be on a hospital bed." Unexpectedly, Rhodes nodded with something resembling respect. "I understand your decision, Mr. Stone. However, you must take certain medications. They will help control the symptoms and quality of life." He wrote prescriptions, gave brochures, scheduled regular tests. I nodded, thinking about something else. There's a certain clarity in 12 months, a clear line, no maybes or we'll sees. A strange relief to know exactly when the end will come. When we left his office, a plan was already forming in my head. If I was going to die, I would do it on my terms. The Great Barrier Reef unfolded beneath me like an alien landscape. I descended deeper, toward a 2-meter tiger shark lazily gliding between coral formations. Don't believe the movies, these creatures rarely attack without reason. But in their eyes, the absolute emptiness of existence, in simpler terms, either you're food or you're not. I aimed the underwater camera as the predator swam within a meter of me. Adrenaline sharpened my senses, my brain working like a Swiss watch. 2 months had passed since that conversation with Rhodes. I left my wife almost all our money, keeping only what I needed to fulfill my deathbed wishes, sold my share in the security firm I founded after leaving service, and made a list. It couldn't be called a banal bucket list. Rather, it was a tactical plan for a final operation. New Zealand was the first stop, skydiving over the Milford Sound fjords. When I stepped into the abyss from a height of 4 kilometers, the sensation was almost like a revelation. I wasn't afraid. After so many years of crawling nightmares, after sweaty awakenings from scenes of murders and explosions, nothing. Just the pure clarity of free fall. Then Australia and diving with sharks without a cage. The local instructor, a tanned, lean aboriginal, looked at me appraisingly. Usually such requests come from suicidal people or psychopaths. Which one are you, mate? A dying man, I answered honestly. His gaze softened. Then you're in the right place. The ocean heals, even if it can't cure. I understood what he meant when the huge tiger shark swam so close that I could distinguish every scar on its skin, a mixture of primal fear and strange serenity. I was just another creature in the ocean, neither special nor insignificant. The Himalayas became the next challenge. Not the commercial Everest, but the less famous yet more technical Manaslu. At an altitude of over 5,000 meters in a camp with piercing cold and thin air, I met a Nepalese monk. He was meditating on a rock, wrapped only in thin saffron cloth, while everyone else bundled up in down jackets and thermal underwear. "You have the eyes of a man who has died many times," he said to me in perfect English. "Death is not your enemy, she is your old acquaintance." "How would you know?" I smirked, offering him a thermos with hot tea. "When you meditate long enough, you begin to feel time in people. Yours is like an hourglass, simultaneously running out, but also returning." I wanted to say it was nonsense, but I couldn't. There was something hypnotic in his eyes. "In this life I too am a soldier," the monk unexpectedly added. "Only my battle is within." That night, for the first time in months, I didn't have a nightmare. With each new adventure, climbing Kilimanjaro, crossing the Atacama Desert, rafting the wild rivers of Alaska, I felt like I was returning to my true self. Maria called less frequently. When I asked about her affairs, she answered briefly, but asked in detail whether I was taking the medications prescribed by Rhodes. "I'm worried, Eric. You're so far away and your condition." "I've never felt better." "That's not normal. Dr. Rhodes says you should be experiencing certain symptoms." And I did experience them. Or rather, I tried to imitate them in our conversations. I lied about dizziness, weakness, and numbness in my fingers. Strangely, every time I took the pills, these symptoms actually appeared: vivid flashes of disorientation, nausea, and impaired coordination. But as soon as I skipped a couple of days, I felt healthy again. In a hotel in Tibet, after a 3-day endurance test when my body should have been exhausted, I suddenly realized a strange pattern. I took out the bottle of pills and examined it carefully. No pharmaceutical company markings, just a printed name and dosage. That evening I flushed half the contents down the toilet. Of course, there was another factor. While I was living this strange, adrenaline-filled year, the balance of my personal account for fulfilling wishes was rapidly approaching zero. But does that matter when the sand in the hourglass is almost gone? The plane landed in Philadelphia at 2 in the morning. The last days in Thailand where I trained in Muay Thai with local masters, had left a new collection of bruises on my body, purple-yellow evidence that I could still feel pain. According to the original plan, I was supposed to return in 4 weeks at the calculated end. But an unbidden inner impulse made me change my ticket and fly back earlier. Intuition, a fighter's best friend, especially when it comes to survival. The taxi dropped me off in the suburb where Maria and I had bought a house 3 years ago. A brick building in colonial style with a neat garden that she adored, and a 2-car garage where I had set up a workshop. The American dream for a retired Special Forces soldier with PTSD and his beautiful wife. It was 3:15 in the morning, but the bedroom light was on. Maria had always been a night owl. I paid the taxi driver and took a small sports bag, all that remained of my previous life. I moved slowly up the driveway, automatically noting the dark silhouette of an unfamiliar car. A latest model Mercedes S-Class, too expensive for our neighborhood. The front door was unlocked. Another warning sign. Maria had always been obsessed with security, even when I explained that a good lock is just an illusion of protection. I entered the dark hall silently. The smell hit my nostrils instantly, expensive men's cologne that I never used. Bergamot 22 by Le Labo, the kind Rhodes himself wore at our meetings. Trained instincts kicked in automatically. I transformed into a sensor, registering every detail. 2 wine glasses on the kitchen table, one with remnants of red wine and a lipstick print. A man's coat on the hanger, not my size and not my style. On the hallway table, 2 mobile phones. One, with a cracked screen, belonged to Maria. The second, in a thin leather case, clearly did not. And the most obvious signal, laughter. Female, breathy, ringing through the not completely closed door of the bedroom on the 2nd floor. My pulse slowed, vision sharpened. Time stretched out, as happens in moments of mortal danger. I gently lowered my bag to the floor and began climbing the stairs. 15 years of special operations had taught me to move silently, even on creaky parquet. Thoughts slid coldly and clearly. There was no primitive jealousy or anger, only tactical analysis of the situation. As if this mission had been planned long ago, and now I was simply following an already known scenario. The 2nd floor of our house has a simple layout, a corridor with 3 bedrooms and a bathroom. The master bedroom is at the far end, overlooking the garden. The door was open a few centimeters, a strip of warm light falling on the dark corridor. I slid along the wall as I had done thousands of times in the dark alleys of Baghdad and Kandahar. Approaching the door, I froze. The laughter subsided, replaced by muffled voices. I didn't try to look inside, it was enough to hear. "Are you sure he'll only return in a month?" It was Rhodes, his voice sounding relaxed. "Absolutely, Maria. The last time he called, he could barely speak coherently. The pills are working even better than you promised. And the financial side. Everything's under control. He signed a power of attorney for me right at the beginning. The insurance is fully processed. I'm listed as the sole beneficiary. Good thing we managed before his adventures. He wouldn't pass the medical examination for such a large sum now. 3 million, darling. And the house. We can finally open that private clinic you've been dreaming of." I silently shifted slightly to the left, where a narrow gap between the door and the frame allowed me to see part of the room. Our bed, or rather now apparently their bed. I could only see Maria partially, a bare shoulder, a cascade of dark hair. Rhodes sat on the edge of the bed, his back to me, in an unbuttoned shirt. "When can I wear it openly?" asked Maria, and I noticed a gleam. She raised her hand to the light. Around her neck hung a chain with a ring. Not a simple one, clearly an engagement ring, with a large diamond sparkling in the rays of the night light. "As soon as it's all over," Rhodes replied. "We'll wait a decent period after the funeral, and then we can announce the engagement. No one will suspect a connection." And Eric still has no idea. In her voice was something between mockery and disbelief. He believes every word. Military men are the most gullible patients. They're used to trusting authorities and following instructions. Give them a convincing diagnosis and a few powerful medications, and they never doubt. Maria laughed. It's so ironic. All those tales about how he survived in hell, how he could read people like an open book. And now, by the end of the month, he won't be able to function independently anymore. Then, hospice. My fingers involuntarily clenched into fists. A simple thought flashed in my head, 3 steps to the bed, and Rhodes would never utter another word. I knew 17 ways to kill a man with my bare hands, many of them silently. But the cold, calculating part of my brain took over. Information. I needed more information. They were talking about a plan, about a hospice, about medications. I remembered the strange pills without markings, the dizziness and weakness that came after taking the medicine and disappeared when I threw them away. I silently retreated back down the corridor, descended the stairs. My bag was still by the door. I took it and left, carefully closing the door behind me. The cold night air was sobering. I walked away from the house without looking back. With each step, rage grew, slow, cold rage of a man betrayed by those closest to him. But behind it, a plan was already forming. Tactical, like all plans in my life. The last nail, a bar in the industrial district, usually frequented by dockers after their shift and other people with good reasons not to look each other in the eye. I knew this place from the time of my first discharge, when I needed anonymity and strong alcohol. Whiskey poured straight into my bloodstream, creating an illusion of warmth. I sat at a back table and methodically got drunk, measured, purposeful, as if completing an assigned task. Tough day, the bartender, a bald man with tattoos on his neck, placed another portion in front of me. Tough life, I replied. I understand, brother, served myself. 3rd Infantry, Iraq, 2005. I nodded. Among veterans, there's no need for extra words. You know what's the funniest thing about dying? I asked after the 5th or 6th portion. That you still die alone, even if someone swore to be by your side. The bartender just shook his head. Dying ain't funny, brother. Whatever's happened, don't rush things. The last thing I remember clearly, paying with bills from my wallet. Then I went out into the rain, mechanically raising my jacket collar. I remember the squeal of brakes, blinding headlights, impact with my left hip against the hood, no pain, just surprise as my body lost orientation in space, flight, and darkness covering consciousness like a blanket. The awakening was agonizing. Sharp smell of antiseptic, piercing beep of medical equipment, pain pulsating in every cell of my body, especially in my left side. Welcome back to the living, Mr. Stone. The voice belonged to a woman, an Asian about 50, in a white coat with a badge reading Dr. Chen. Where am I? My voice sounded like sandpaper. St. Elizabeth Memorial Hospital. You were hit by a car. 2 broken ribs, a bruised kidney, mild concussion. But you got lucky, no internal bleeding or head trauma. I slowly scanned the room. A hospital ward, but not the hospital where Rhodes worked. How did I get here? An ambulance picked you up on 23rd Street. Standard procedure, the nearest hospital with trauma care. Dr. Chen approached the monitors, checked the readings, and made a note on her tablet. Mr. Stone, there's something strange in your tests. In what sense? According to our data, you have perfect indicators for a man your age. No traces of the autoimmune disease mentioned in your medical record. I tried to sit up, wincing from the pain. I don't understand. When we sent a request about your medical history, we received data about progressive neuroimmune myelopathy in terminal stage, but your current tests show nothing like that. On the contrary, except for the injuries from the accident, you're healthier than many 30-year-olds. My brain worked feverishly, assembling the puzzle. The conversation between Maria and Rhodes, the strange medications, symptoms appearing only after taking the pills. Dr. Chen, may I ask you for one thing? Don't tell anyone about my stay here, especially Dr. Rhodes' clinic. She frowned. That's an unusual request. I know, my voice sounded calmer than I felt, but I have reason to believe that my diagnosis was fabricated. Her eyes widened. That's a serious accusation. And deliberately poisoning a patient under the guise of treatment is a serious crime. She was silent, then nodded. I saw strange traces of toxins in your blood. At first I thought they were side effects of the medications for your supposed illness. But these substances aren't used in standard treatment protocols for neuroimmune diseases. What kind of substances? A cocktail of low-concentration neurotoxins. In small doses, they cause symptoms similar to progressive nervous diseases, dizziness, impaired coordination, muscle weakness, cognitive disturbances, and slowly kill the patient. With prolonged use, yes. I looked out the ward window. Rain was still drumming on the glass. The world beyond it suddenly became crystal clear, as only happened in moments of highest danger. Dr. Chen, I need your recommendations. What would you do if you found out someone was trying to kill you using a fake diagnosis? She looked at me with a long, appraising gaze. I would gather evidence, she finally said, and I would be very careful. When I called Maria, I heard more panic in her voice than I expected. Eric, where are you? The police reported that you returned to the city and were hit by a car. Are you okay? I imagined her face, brown eyes widened in feigned concern, perfectly lined eyebrows drawn together in pretend worry. I'm in the hospital. My voice sounded weaker than usual. I deliberately added shortness of breath. I don't remember what happened. Woke up here. Which hospital? I'll come right away. St. Elizabeth's. I was hit by a car. I coughed, intentionally heavy and hoarse. Oh my God, Alex. Dr. Rhodes is with me. We're leaving right now. Alex, so they were already on first-name terms. With a doctor I had only seen in formal settings. Dr. Chen stood nearby, listening to the conversation. After the call ended, she sat down in the chair by the bed. So I understand there's a plan. Yes, I sat up straighter, dropping the pretense of weakness. But I need your help. When Maria and Rhodes burst into the ward an hour later, they saw what they expected, an emaciated man with a pale face, connected to an IV. Darling, Maria rushed to me, embracing me with exaggerated care. We were so worried. Rhodes maintained professional distance, but poorly concealed anger flashed in his eyes. What happened, Eric? You were supposed to be in Thailand. I decided to return earlier, wanted to surprise you. I simulated another coughing fit. And instead got surprised yourself by a careless driver. Dr. Chen entered the ward with a tablet. Dr. Rhodes, I'm Dr. Chen, Mr. Stone's attending physician. May I talk to you about his condition? They moved to a corner of the ward. I saw Rhodes tense when Chen began showing him some graphs on the tablet. His condition is much worse than I expected, Rhodes said loudly. This accident could have accelerated the progression of the disease. Interesting that you mention progression. Dr. Chen elegantly tucked a strand of graying hair behind her ear. When our tests show no signs of the underlying disease indicated in his records. Rhodes paled but quickly composed himself. You obviously haven't conducted specific tests for progressive neuroimmune myelopathy. It's a rare disease with. I'm familiar with this pathology, Dr. Rhodes, and we did run a full spectrum of tests. Let me show you the results. While they immersed themselves in discussion, Maria returned to my bedside. Her hand rested on mine, cold fingers with perfectly manicured nails gripping my limp wrist. Honey, everything's fine. Soon we'll take you home and I'll take care of you. You look happy, I whispered, watching her reaction. What? Of course not. I'm terribly worried. No, happy, radiant, as if something good happened in your life. Eric, it's the drugs talking. You know hallucinations are part of your illness. I noticed how her other hand involuntarily jerked toward her neck, where the chain with the ring was hidden under her blouse. Rhodes returned to us, his face a mask of professional concern. We need to transfer you to my clinic immediately, Eric. This accident could have seriously affected the course of the disease. Dr. Chen objected. With all due respect, Dr. Rhodes, my patient is not yet stable enough for transport. From a purely medical perspective, Rhodes spoke through gritted teeth, his condition requires specialized care that your hospital cannot provide. Chen remained impassive. Doesn't our disagreement about the very existence of the diagnosis call into question the necessity of such care? I saw Rhodes barely containing his fury, his fingers clenching and unclenching, an involuntary gesture of a man ready for violence. Maria, I addressed my wife in a voice weaker than necessary, I need some time here. Dr. Chen, she's helping me. But Eric, her eyes widened in genuine surprise, Alex has been treating you from the beginning. He knows everything about your condition. That's exactly what worries me. I closed my eyes, pretending to be exhausted. Please, give me a few days. Rhodes stepped toward the bed. Eric, you don't understand. The longer you stay without proper treatment, the more you risk. I looked him straight in the eyes. Risk what, doctor? We stared at each other, and I saw fear flash behind his professional facade. He was the first to look away. Give him a couple of days to recover from the trauma, said Dr. Chen. After that, I'll personally oversee his transfer to your clinic if necessary. When they finally left, I took a deep breath. Dr. Chen locked the ward door and turned to me. They'll be back, and with lawyers. I know. I sat up in bed. We have 2, maximum 3 days before they find a way to get me out of here. And then what? Then I'll let them do it. I saw her surprise and explained. I need to find out how deep this scheme goes, where the hospice is, other patients' documents. The only way is to let them continue their game while I play mine. Dr. Chen silently looked at me. You realize you're risking your life. These people have already tried to slowly kill you, if they realize you know the truth. Risk is part of my profession. I straightened up, feeling pain in my ribs but ignoring it. And I now have an advantage I didn't have before. What? They think I'm dying, but I know I'm alive, and I intend to stay that way as long as possible. I opened my clenched fist, showing a miniature voice recorder, a recording of the entire conversation with Rhodes and Maria. This is just the beginning, Dr. Chen. The hourglass has flipped, and now time is working for me. Chapter 2. 3 days in the hospital gave me time to formulate a plan. Dr. Chen provided cover. According to the official story, my condition was deteriorating due to the underlying disease, complicated by injuries. Maria and Rhodes had to play by my rules, though they thought the game was following their script. 15 years in special forces taught me the main thing in an undercover operation. Success depends on 2 things: how convincingly you lie and how accurately you know the truth. I lied virtuously. And I was determined to learn the whole truth, not just for myself, but for everyone who had already fallen victim to their scheme. Maria met me at the threshold of our home with the professional care of a nurse and the insincerity of a B-movie actress. Rhodes had arranged for my discharge from St. Elizabeth's, a wheelchair, a special bed in the living room, and a battery of new medications were ready for my return. You need to rest, dear, Maria chirped, helping me settle into bed. Alex says your condition is deteriorating faster than anticipated. That terrible accident. I simulated a fit of trembling, watching as her gaze momentarily flashed, not with concern, but with something resembling satisfaction. You know, I whispered, In the Himalayas, I met a monk. He said that death is my old acquaintance. Eric, you've always been prone to dramatizing. She adjusted the pillow under my head. This is just another battle. We'll manage. We? What an amazing pronoun from the lips of someone planning your death. The next morning Rhodes arrived. He examined me with demonstrative thoroughness, replaced the IV, and increased the dosage of medications. The progression is faster than we expected, he told Maria as if I wasn't in the room. We need to adjust the protocol. How long do I have left? I asked, deliberately slurring my words as if speaking was difficult. Their eyes met for a moment, too long a moment. Hard to say exactly, Rhodes answered evasively, but we should think in terms of weeks, not a month. When they went to the kitchen, I quickly emptied the IV into a special vial hidden in the mattress. Dr. Chen had agreed to analyze the composition of the medications. Now I wasn't taking anything Maria or Rhodes gave me. Everything went down the toilet or into special containers. During their absence, I installed miniature cameras at strategic points around the house. 5 years in Special Forces intelligence taught me how to find ideal viewing angles and camouflage equipment. One in the air duct above our bedroom, a second in the living room wall clock, a third in the kitchen ventilation grill. On the third day, my efforts bore first fruit. Maria received a call when she thought I was asleep under sedatives. "No, he doesn't suspect anything," she whispered, turning to the window. "Everything's going according to plan. Yes, I personally monitor his medication intake. No, I don't observe any signs of improvement. On the contrary, he's getting worse every day." A long pause, then more quietly. "I understand your concerns, Mr. Kowalski, but Alex guarantees the insurance will be paid in full. The documents are already prepared. Yes, we've discussed the possibility of transferring to hospice. Within the next week, I think." Mr. Kowalski, insurance. I added this fact to my mental investigation map. That evening Rhodes came again. Maria met him in the hallway with a long kiss. I watched through my phone monitor connected to the hidden cameras. "How's our patient?" asked Rhodes. "Still moving," Maria giggled, and something icy constricted inside me at that sound. "But getting weaker. Your new pills work wonderfully." They came into the living room, where I pretended to be asleep, with heavy, raspy breathing. "I think it's time to discuss transfer to Azure Haven," Rhodes said quietly. "In his condition." "Isn't it too early?" Maria looked concerned, but not about me. "Not all the documents are ready yet. What if he won't recover," Rhodes cut her off. "And in the hospice, we can control the process much more effectively, and without unnecessary witnesses." Maria nodded. "All right, I'll prepare him. I'll say home care isn't sufficient. Tell him you're concerned about his comfort, that you want his final days to be dignified." Their fake concern evoked in me not so much anger as the cold, calculating attention of a sniper choosing the moment to shoot. I carefully snored while they discussed the details of my dignified death. Azure Haven was located an hour's drive from the city, in an isolated estate surrounded by a stone wall like a medieval castle. Through the window of the medical van, I observed the spacious park with well-kept trees and winding paths, a perfect place for walks that none of the patients would ever take. At the entrance, we were stopped by security, 2 men with military bearing, in dark blue uniforms with the hospice emblem. They checked the documents, looked into the van, and exchanged a few words on the radio before raising the barrier. "Impressive security for a place where people come to die," I muttered, deliberately not hiding the sarcasm. "It's for the protection of patients, dear." Maria squeezed my hand. "Very wealthy people are treated here." "Or die," I corrected, watching her purse her lips. Rhodes met us at the main entrance, a 3-story colonial-style building with a wide veranda and columns. He was already in a white coat with a director's badge. "Welcome to Azure Haven," he smiled. Your new home, Eric. Temporary, I mentally corrected. Inside, the building was a strange hybrid of a five-star hotel and a hospital. Marble floors, antique furniture, and works of art coexisted with medical equipment, nursing stations, and the smell of antiseptic. This is your room. Rhodes opened the door to a spacious room with panoramic windows overlooking a lake. I think you'll be comfortable here. I silently assessed the room out of Special Forces habit. One door, locked from the outside, I saw Rhodes demonstratively put the key card in his pocket. Windows with reinforced glass that didn't open. A surveillance camera in the corner near the ceiling, another disguised as a smoke detector. A bedside call button for staff, probably recording sound as well. This room, it seems lockable, I commented, feigning slight disorientation. Standard security protocol, Rhodes smiled. Some patients in terminal stages may suffer from disorientation and unintentionally harm themselves. Or intentionally escape, I thought. The staff was introduced that same day. Head nurse Mrs. Greer, a tall woman with a stone face and eyes that deliberately avoided direct contact. Two orderlies, the Rodriguez twins, silent and sturdy, moving with the professional caution of people accustomed to violence. And Ayako Mizuki, a young Japanese intern with short black hair dyed with blue streaks, and a wide, genuine smile that seemed out of place within these walls. "I'll be helping with your daily procedures, Mr. Stone," she said with a slight accent while setting up monitors next to my bed. "If you need anything, just press this button." In her eyes, I didn't see the clinical indifference displayed by the rest of the staff. By evening, I was wheeled to the common hall for socialization with other patients. A spacious room with comfortable armchairs, televisions, and bookshelves was filled predominantly with elderly people, most in wheelchairs. Eric Stone, Rhodes introduced me to a silver-haired man with aristocratic posture. Arthur Westmoreland, former chairman of the Continental Banking Board of Directors. Westmoreland nodded indifferently, his gaze unfocused, as if looking through me. "Pleased to meet you," he pronounced with effort. The rest of the introductions followed a similar pattern. Richard Hodgson, an oil tycoon from Texas. Eleanor Price, a media mogul's widow. Garrett Clayton, a former federal judge. They all looked successful, wealthy, and strangely absent with sluggish movements and slurred speech. I recorded every detail, conducting an initial assessment of the situation, as I had done on dozens of special operations. Evacuation routes. The main entrance, always guarded, service exit with an electronic lock, fire escape, only on one side of the building, apparently leading to the basement. Security systems. Cameras everywhere, perimeter guards, electronic keys for staff. Schedule, staff shift every 8 hours. Patient checks every 2 hours, medication distributed strictly on schedule. While Maria was talking to Mrs. Greer about the details of my stay, I observed the surroundings and felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. This place wasn't a hospice. It was a prison with medical services. On the third night at Azure Haven, I woke up to a barely audible sound in the corridor. My body reacted before my mind. I was fully alert and on guard in a split second, as I had learned in countless ambushes and night operations. Muffled voices, the squeak of wheels. I carefully slipped out of bed, grateful that I was already strong enough to do without IVs. The nurses believed I was taking all the pills, which I secretly collected in a small cavity cut into the mattress. The door was locked, but over the past days I had made primitive tools from medical supplies, thin wire from an unraveled stethoscope, a plastic card reinforced with strips of tape. The lock yielded after 15 seconds. I carefully opened the door a few millimeters. The corridor was dimly lit by night lamps. Two orderlies were pushing a gurney with a motionless patient. I recognized Garrett Clayton, the former federal judge I had been introduced to in the common room. His face had a strange grayish tint. His eyes were half closed, but not from sleep. The pupils jerked in rapid, chaotic movements, as if he was trying to say something with his gaze. They turned the corner toward the service elevator. I slipped into the corridor, staying in the shadows, and followed them at a safe distance. The elevator went down, the indicator showing the basement floor. I decided not to risk it and returned, memorizing this route for future investigation. The next morning, Clayton was absent from the common room. When I casually asked Ayako about him, she quietly replied, "He got worse during the night. He's in intensive care." Something in her voice made me look more closely. Concern, fear. "Does that happen often?" I asked, feigning the detachment of a dying man. "More often than it should." She quickly looked around and changed the subject. By lunchtime, I managed to position myself next to Arthur Westmoreland, the banker. He sat in a wheelchair, staring meaninglessly at a chess game Hodgson was playing against himself. I noticed his medications lay untouched on the table. "Don't like pills, Mr. Westmoreland?" I asked quietly. He slowly turned his head. "After them, I can't think." His voice sounded clearer than the day before. "I don't take them either," I whispered. "They're poisoning us." Something flashed in his eyes, a spark of awareness. "They made me sign papers," he said barely audibly. "A new will, my daughter. She's not my daughter. I've never seen that woman before." Mrs. Greer noticed our conversation and immediately approached. "Mr. Westmoreland, it's time for your therapy." She gave me a warning look. "Mr. Stone, you shouldn't tire other patients." An hour later, Westmoreland was no longer in the common room. I never saw him again. In the following days, I carefully explored the hospice zones accessible to me. The East Wing was completely closed to patients, doors requiring special access. The basement, where Clayton had been taken, was also inaccessible without staff key cards. Gradually, I noticed a strict hierarchy of movements. Patients were allowed only in their rooms, the common room, and on a small open terrace, always under staff supervision. Medical procedures were conducted in a special room on the first floor, with each patient accompanied by at least 2 staff members. Passing by a service room, I overheard a conversation between the orderlies. "The new batch arrives on Thursday," one of the Rodriguez twins was saying. 3 VIP clients." "Inheritance documents ready?" asked the other. "The lawyers have processed everything. Standard scheme, progressive dementia, inability to make decisions, trusted persons." The door closed, cutting off the conversation, but I had heard enough. The patients weren't patients but prisoners, and I was one of them. On the 6th day, when the hospice routine had become completely clear to me, I decided to act. At night, after the nurse made her final rounds, I again picked the lock of my room and headed for the technical rooms. The experience of intelligence operations in Afghanistan proved unexpectedly useful within the walls of Azure Haven. The same principles: stay in the shadows, move between checks, know the location of surveillance cameras. Air ducts and service corridors became my allies. In the medical inventory closet, I found what I was looking for: components for makeshift surveillance devices. Tiny cameras from disassembled medical endoscopes, transmitters from modified cardiac monitors, power from infusion pump batteries. Over 3 night excursions, I installed 5 such devices. In the common room, in the corridor next to the elevator, in the procedure room, in the service room, and most risky, in the ventilation grill near Rhodes' office. The transmitter was tuned to a frequency I could receive on a modified tablet issued to patients for entertainment. Now I could see and hear what was happening at key points in the hospice, even without leaving my room. Results didn't take long. The recordings showed systematic administration of medications to patients that weren't documented in official medical charts. Every evening, staff added a colorless liquid from unmarked ampules to the IVs. After these injections, even the most active patients became sluggish and disoriented. In the procedure room, patients regularly had tests done. the results of which weren't entered into the general charts but sent directly to Rhodes. I noticed that each patient had a special progression chart where the dynamics of the poisoning were tracked. On the third day of observation, I recorded a conversation between Rhodes and Mrs. Greer in his office. "Clayton is becoming a problem," Rhodes was saying. "His nephew has started asking questions, demands an independent medical examination. Perhaps we should accelerate the process for the patient in room 12, Greer coldly suggested. "He's having problems with his heirs." "Agreed. Increase the dose of neuroparalytic in the evening IV. Within 48 hours, everything should look like a standard complication of his disease." They were talking about Judge Clayton. They were planning to kill him because he had become a problem. I understood that I needed irrefutable evidence. Video recordings and overheard conversations were a good start, but I needed more: the hospice archive, where all patient documents, financial operations, and real medical records were stored. I was sure that there I would find evidence of dozens of murders disguised as natural deaths. I needed access to the archive, and for that I needed help. Yako Mizuki turned out to be exactly the person who could help. I noticed her interest in military topics in the very first days. On her tablet, there were always books about modern conflicts, documentaries about special operations. Once she saw me observing her reading and smiled shyly. "Strange hobby for a nurse, huh?" "Unusual," I agreed. "Why specifically military topics?" "My brother, he wanted to become a military man." Her eyes dimmed. "It didn't work out because of leukemia. I became a nurse partly because of him. And I became a soldier because I didn't know what else I could be." I allowed sincerity to slip into my voice for the first time in a long while. That's how our relationship began: cautious, gradual. Each day she spent a little more time with me than required by protocol. I shared stories about service, not the classified aspects but the human ones, about camaraderie, about survival, about making decisions under pressure. She absorbed every word, sometimes asking sharp, unexpectedly deep questions. "You're not like the other patients," she said one day, checking my vitals. "Your eyes, there's no cloudiness in them." "Maybe my disease progresses differently," I evasively replied. "Or it doesn't exist at all," she suddenly whispered, not raising her eyes from the monitor. My pulse quickened, but I maintained composure. "What do you mean?" "Some patients, their symptoms don't correspond to the diagnoses." She spoke so quietly that I barely made out the words. "I'm studying, reading medical literature. What I see here, it's not what should be." I decided to risk. "Do you keep records of your observations?" She nodded. "In a personal diary, no one knows." "Yako," I took her hand, for the first time allowing myself physical contact, "you're in danger, if they suspect." "I know," her eyes met mine, fear mixing with determination in them, "but I can't just watch as people are, as they're killed." I finished for her. Long silence, then, "Do you have a plan?" "Partially. I need access to the archive, to the documents." "I have a key card." She touched the pocket of her uniform. "Low-level access, but it opens the archive." Our plan formed quickly. Ayako was to come to my room in the evening under the pretext of an additional check. We decided that the best way to justify a lengthy stay alone was to create the appearance of romantic interest. The surveillance cameras in the rooms didn't record sound, only images. We could speak freely if it looked like an intimate conversation. When she came that evening, the awkwardness between us was genuine. I talked about the Atacama Desert, one of my last adventures before returning home. She listened, sitting on the edge of my bed, leaning closer to me. For the cameras, it looked like the natural development of sympathy between a young nurse and her patient. "They'll never let you live if they find out what you know," she whispered, leaning to my ear as if for a kiss. "I know, but I need to gather evidence." "Why risk it? We could just report to the police. Without evidence, Rhodes is too influential, too respected. Only irrefutable proof will make them believe. Our conversation grew into something more, unexpectedly for both of us. Her lips pressed against mine in a kiss that started as part of our cover, but quickly became something real. In her touch was the desperation of someone who had held back emotions for too long. When she fell asleep next to me after what happened, I carefully extracted the key card from her uniform pocket and left a note under the pillow. Sorry. Can't risk your life. Destroy this message. Be careful, they won't stop at anything. The Azure Haven archive was located in the East Wing, on the basement floor. At 2 in the morning, I picked the lock of my room and moved along the familiar route through service corridors, avoiding surveillance cameras. Yako's key card worked perfectly. The archive door silently opened. Inside was a large room with rows of metal cabinets, computers, and racks with documents. I quickly oriented myself in the organization system, one section for current patients, another for discharged. A sinister euphemism for the deceased. I started with current patients. From my incomplete count, there should have been about 30 people in the hospice. The active patients folder contained 32 cases. I randomly selected several folders and found a common scheme. A wealthy person, a rare or difficult to diagnose disease, rich insurance, minimal real relatives, or their complete absence. In each case, trusted persons managing the patient's finances. The names of these trusted persons repeated from case to case, about a dozen of the same people. My own case proved particularly informative. A detailed treatment plan with an exact schedule of doses for various neurotoxins. A forecast of lethal outcome, 17 days after admission. A complete list of property, including the house, bank accounts, investments. And most importantly, documents transferring everything to Maria, with subsequent distribution of a significant portion of funds through a series of shell accounts in offshore zones. In another section of the archive, I discovered the hospice's financial documentation. Over the past 3 years, more than 120 patients had passed through Azure Haven. The average cost of care ranged from $50,000 to $100,000 per week, but the real money came after death, million-dollar transfers from grateful relatives, insurance payments, rewritten fortunes. An internal report marked confidential contained profit calculations for the last quarter, more than $40 million. The document was signed by Rhodes, Mrs. Greer, and another name that made me go cold, M. Stone, Risk Analysis Department. Maria, not just an accomplice, a key element of the scheme. Not a secretary at an insurance company, but a specialist in selecting potential victims with large insurance policies and without close relatives. In a separate folder, I found her reports, cold, methodical analysis of potential clients, with an assessment of their financial status, social isolation, and legal vulnerability. I photographed every document, uploading the images to an encrypted cloud storage via a phone taken from an employee during one of the night excursions. When the main evidence was collected, I stumbled upon the final piece of the puzzle, a schedule of new patient arrivals. The next day, a VIP client was expected, designated as TH San Francisco. Diagnosis: pancreatic cancer, terminal stage. Insurance: $25 million. Trusted person: SD spouse. Special note from Rhodes: maximum security and confidentiality. Personal meeting at the airport. I was about to leave the archive when I heard voices in the corridor. Guards discussing tomorrow's arrival. A Japanese businessman, they say, arriving with personal security. Not the first time we've worked with foreigners. The main thing is that his Yakuza don't come after him, the second one chuckled. Yakuza, a Japanese businessman with a huge fortune. Now everything was clear, not just another victim, but a figure with a serious criminal past and connections. They themselves didn't understand what fire they were playing with. I slipped back to my room half an hour before the morning rounds. Ayako had awakened, discovered the missing key in my absence. Her note, found under my pillow, was laconic. "I believe in you. Be careful." The world of Azure Haven now appeared before my eyes as a perfectly planned criminal scheme. Not just fraud or deception, serial murders on an industrial scale, disguised as palliative care. Rhodes, Maria, and their accomplices had destroyed hundreds of people over the years, building an empire on suffering and death. And soon, a new victim would arrive here. A person capable of turning the whole situation around if, of course, I could reach him before they started treating him. Chapter 3. In special operations, there's a moment when reconnaissance ends and action begins. My mentor in the Rangers called it the point of no return, when you already know enough to act but not enough to feel safe. I had reached this point. With the evidence collected in the archive, I could contact the authorities, but intuition suggested that the time for retreat had passed. The threads of this conspiracy ran too deep, affecting influential people. To destroy the scheme required not just information, but a catalyst capable of triggering a chain reaction. And fate, it seemed, had prepared the perfect candidate for this role. The morning turned out unusually hectic for the hospice, where time usually flowed with the slowness of dying. Staff rushed through the corridors with rehearsed panic. They wiped already impeccably clean surfaces, verified schedules, double-checked equipment. A special menu was being prepared in the kitchen. The guard force doubled. Sitting in my wheelchair in the common room, I observed the preparations with the external indifference of a terminal patient and the internal vigilance of an operative. Ayako, using the pretext of measuring my blood pressure, leaned in and whispered, "VIP guest, Japanese billionaire, everyone's on edge." "Not just a billionaire," I barely noticeably shook my head. "Do you know who the Yakuza are?" Her eyes widened. Like practically any Japanese person, she knew perfectly well what that word meant. "Have they lost their minds, bringing here?" Quiet, I squeezed her wrist. "You mustn't show that you know." An hour later, all patients received instructions to remain in their rooms for additional rest. But my room was positioned with a view of the main entrance, and I could observe the arrival of the important guest. A convoy of 3 black SUVs stopped at the front entrance exactly at noon. From the first car emerged 4 men, bodyguards with military bearing and professional ability to conceal weapons under civilian clothes. From the second, an elegant elderly Japanese woman in a traditional kimono of silver blue color and perfectly arranged graying hair. And finally, from the third car, 2 assistants helped an elderly Japanese man exit. Even at a distance, I noted the contradiction. His body seemed frail, movements difficult, but his posture remained impeccable, and his gaze sharp and commanding. He leaned on an inlaid cane with a silver knob but didn't allow anyone to support him while walking. Despite his apparent weakness, I sensed that inner strength I had encountered only in people accustomed to commanding others. Rhodes personally came out to meet the guest, bowing with obsequiousness that looked inappropriate on his usually arrogant face. The Japanese man afforded him only a short nod. Within moments, they disappeared inside the building. Later, when Ayako brought me dinner, she broke professional protocol by sitting next to me. "His name is Hideo Tanaka," she informed me, pretending to adjust my pillow. "Officially, head of a trading corporation from San Francisco. Unofficially," she lowered her voice, "in Japan, his family controlled one of the largest Yakuza clans until they were pushed to America in the 70s. What's wrong with him?" "Terminal stage pancreatic cancer. That's what the documentation says, but—" Her face darkened. "I saw real pancreatic cancer in my brother. Tanaka doesn't have the characteristic jaundice, cachexia, pain syndrome. Either he's in miraculous remission, or another fake diagnosis," I finished. "But why he's a dangerous man?" I looked at her with a heavy gaze. "That's exactly why. The more dangerous the victim, the more important it is to ensure they don't suspect anything until the very end. That night I slipped out of my room again. The hospice was unusually lively for this time, additional guard posts, more frequent nurse rounds. The east wing of the second floor was completely blocked off. That's where Tanaka and his entourage were accommodated. I moved like a ghost through service corridors, using routes developed over days of observation. I needed to get to the archive again to learn more about the new patient. The risk increased manifold, but there was no time for caution. The archive was empty as I had expected. Tanaka's file lay in a special place marked Priority A. Quickly reviewing the documents, I discovered the familiar scheme: falsified test results, fabricated diagnosis, treatment schedule. In one document, I found the contact of the person who had referred Tanaka specifically to Azure Haven, a certain Dr. Ishikawa from San Francisco Medical Center. The name meant nothing to me, but was worth remembering. I was about to leave when I heard voices in the adjacent room, the administrative office connected to the archive. Among the shelves, I found a convenient position for observation through a ventilation grill. In the office, 4 people met: Rhodes, Mrs. Greer, the elderly Japanese woman in a kimono, and a young Japanese man, about 35 in appearance, with the physique of a professional fighter and cold-blooded confidence in every movement. I immediately understood that this man was dangerous, not just as a physical threat, but as a predator accustomed to killing without hesitation. "Mr. Yamamoto," Rhodes addressed the young Japanese man, "we've fulfilled all confidentiality requirements. All staff contacting the patient have signed additional agreements." "Confidentiality doesn't concern me," Yamamoto's voice sounded soft, with a slight accent. "What concerns me is effectiveness. Time is of crucial importance." "Kenji is right," interjected the elderly Japanese woman. "My husband, for all his weakness, remains a perceptive man. If he suspects something amiss—" "Mrs. Tanaka," Rhodes smiled with professional confidence, "we specialize exactly in such cases. The medications are individually selected. Symptoms will increase gradually, mimicking the natural progression of the disease." "And his security?" asked Mrs. Greer. "They could create problems." "Don't worry about that." Sumiko Tanaka covered a sinister smile with her slender hand. "3 of them already work for Kenji. The rest have been eliminated or neutralized." "What about the documents?" Yamamoto spoke in a businesslike tone. "The will, transfer of business rights." "Everything's prepared. Our lawyer will meet with Mr. Tanaka tomorrow." Rhodes took out a folder. "After the first dose of special medications, he'll become more compliant. He'll sign everything." Sumiko unfolded a map on the table that looked like a corporate structure diagram. "After Hideo's death, control over all legal businesses passes to me. In parallel, Kenji consolidates power over operational units. Within a month, we will officially unite our clans." "Through marriage," added Yamamoto, and his hand possessively rested on the shoulder of the woman who was twice his age. "The amount of your remuneration," Sumiko opened a laptop and turned it toward Rhodes, "is impressive even by our standards." I noticed how Rhodes' pupils dilated. Even from my position, the sum with numerous zeros was visible. "Of course," continued Sumiko, "we expect special attention to details. I personally choose the medications. My husband Hideo should suffer, slowly. I've waited for this moment for 40 years. In her words rang such icy hatred that even Rhodes, accustomed to death, looked uncomfortable. "By the end of the week, we can start the main phase. Within 10 days, partial paralysis will occur, then coma. Death in 2 weeks maximum." "Excellent," Yamamoto nodded. "Then everything is going according to plan." I carefully retreated, realizing that I had witnessed not just another murder within the walls of Azure Haven, but a crime that could lead to a bloody war between Yakuza clans, and I found myself at the epicenter. The plan formed by itself. I had to talk to Tanaka, warn him, but how to approach a man guarded around the clock. For 2 days I observed, studied the round schedule, staff movement, guard placement. On the third night, an opportunity presented itself. I noticed that at 3 in the morning there was a guard shift change and a brief period when surveillance was minimal. At this same time, one of the nurses made rounds. Rita, a full-bodied woman with chronic fatigue on her face and a habit of checking patients as quickly as possible. Tanaka's room was at the very end, and guards slept in a chair before the door. Bypassing him wasn't possible. I had to act more directly. Using the silent strangulation technique that I had perfected in hundreds of special operations, I put him into a deep sleep without causing serious harm. Silently opening the door, I found myself in luxurious quarters that resembled a five-star hotel room more than a hospital ward. In the subdued light of night lamps, I distinguished a silhouette in the bed and another silhouette in the chair beside it. "I was waiting for when you would come," a hoarse voice said in Japanese. I froze, ready for any development. The night lamp became brighter, and I saw Hideo Tanaka sitting in bed. Next to him in the chair sat a gray-haired Japanese man with a stone face, a personal bodyguard holding his hand under his jacket, undoubtedly on a weapon handle. "Do you speak Japanese?" Tanaka asked in English. "Only basic phrases," I answered, slowly raising my hands. "I came not to harm but to warn." "About what?" His tone held neither fear nor surprise. "That your diagnosis is fake. That your wife and a man named Kenji Yamamoto are planning your slow murder. And that Azure Haven is not a hospice but a death factory." Tanaka said something in Japanese to his guard, who reluctantly removed his hand from under his jacket. "Sato says that if you wanted to kill me, you would have already tried to do so," translated Tanaka. "And I say that if you were going to warn about a conspiracy, you would have come up with a more plausible story. Your wife is in collusion with Yamamoto. She personally selects the medications they'll poison you with so that you suffer slowly before death. They plan to unite the clans after your death, through marriage." Something flashed in the old man's eyes, a barely noticeable burst of anger, immediately hidden under a mask of impassivity. "Good story," he smiled thinly. "But why should I believe a dying American who sneaked into my room in the middle of the night?" "Because I'm not dying. Neither are you. They're trying to kill me exactly the same way they plan to kill you." I briefly told my story about the fake diagnosis, about the betrayal by my wife and Rhodes, about their scheme with the hospice. Tanaka listened without interrupting. His face remained impenetrable. "Evidence," he finally said. "Even assuming I believed your story, I need evidence. I have recordings of their conversations, copies of documents on how they falsify diagnoses and slowly kill patients with special preparations, and yesterday's recording of a conversation where your wife literally plans your murder and subsequent marriage to Yamamoto." I took out my phone and played the video shot through the ventilation grill. On screen, Sumiko Tanaka discussed with Rhodes and Kenji the details of their plan. The old man's face remained stone-like, but I noticed how the knuckles of his fingers, gripping the blanket, turned white. "If you're telling the truth," he said after a long pause, "then why did you come to me instead of the authorities?" "Because this scheme is too deeply rooted. They have connections, money, influence. Even with evidence, an investigation could take months, and we don't have months. We have days, maybe hours." I looked him straight in the eyes. "But you have what I don't: power, resources, people ready to act immediately." Tanaka exchanged glances with his bodyguard, then nodded. "Sato, check the guard outside the door." While Sato followed the order, Tanaka studied me intently. "You're a former military man, special forces." "Yes, 15 years of service." "It shows in how you move, how you assess danger." He barely noticeably smiled. "In another situation, I would offer you a job." Sato returned, and reported something in Japanese. "The guard is unconscious but alive," translated Tanaka. "That's true, you could have killed but chose not to." He was silent, then made his decision. "I'll give you a chance to prove your story, but if you're lying—" "If I'm lying, I'm already a dead man," I replied. "In any case—" "Sato," Tanaka addressed the bodyguard, "activate Protocol Sakura. Immediately." The bodyguard took out a phone and typed a short message, then nodded. "Now listen carefully," Tanaka gestured for me to sit. "You've just set in motion a mechanism that cannot be stopped. In 12 hours my people will arrive here, real ones, not traitors. If you lied, they will kill you. If you told the truth, then we both need to survive until those 12 hours. I finished for him. "Exactly," nodded Tanaka. "So how do I avoid these special medications?" In the morning, Azure Haven functioned as usual. Nurses made rounds, patients received their medications, staff exchanged routine phrases. But I sensed an underlying tension in the air. Something had changed. The VIP section guard doubled. Unfamiliar security staff appeared at the main entrance, people with the cold eyes of professional fighters. According to the plan developed at night with Tanaka, I was to continue playing the role of a terminal patient, and he to maintain the appearance of cooperation with the treatment. We agreed on a system for safely disposing of toxic preparations and alarm signals in case of an unforeseen situation. At noon, Ayako found an opportunity to discreetly pass me a note. "Something's happening. New guards, everyone's nervous." I nodded to her, letting her know I was aware. In the common room where I was wheeled after lunch, the atmosphere seemed deceptively calm. But I noticed how Mrs. Greer feverishly whispered something to Rhodes, who increasingly glanced at his watch. At 2 o'clock, the first deviation from the usual routine occurred. Sumiko Tanaka, accompanied by Kenji, unexpectedly left the hospice on urgent business. I watched as their car rapidly drove out the gates. By 3 o'clock, I had a distinct feeling that the plan had been discovered. The perimeter guard tripled. Orderlies and nurses were instructed not to let patients out of their rooms due to quarantine measures. Rhodes locked himself in his office with several of Yamamoto's men. I decided to act. Using the pretext of an urgent need for the toilet, I slipped away from the nurse's supervision and headed for Tanaka's room. The corridor was empty, which in itself was an alarming sign. The door to Tanaka's room was ajar. Inside, I discovered 2 guards, both dead, with neat puncture wounds at the base of the skull, a classic professional killer's signature. Tanaka himself was gone. Someone had betrayed him. Was he still alive? Sumiko and Kenji had obviously learned about Protocol Sakura and decided to act immediately. Perhaps one of the guards was a traitor, but where had they taken Tanaka? A sudden burst of automatic gunfire outside the building answered my question. Looking out the window, I saw a firefight breaking out at the main gates between the hospice security and a group of Asians in formal suits who had arrived in black SUVs. Tanaka's people had arrived earlier than planned. Almost simultaneously, shots rang out from the western wing. The battle had begun on 2 flanks, Tanaka's forces attacking from outside, and traitors working for Kenji opening fire from inside. I rushed back to the common room. Panic had already overtaken the staff and patients. Yako was trying to calm disoriented elderly people when I grabbed her arm. "Where's Rhodes? Where's my wife?" "They're in the East Wing," her voice trembled. "What's happening?" "Clan war. The building will soon become a battlefield." I quickly explained the situation, omitting details of my involvement. "We need to evacuate the patients," Yako said resolutely, "and the staff." "Are there emergency exits?" "Only through the basement. There are technical tunnels leading to the boiler room, but the doors are locked and—" A new series of shots, now closer, interrupted her. "Evacuate everyone you can to the service staircase in the West Wing," I firmly gripped her shoulders. "I'll deal with the doors and distract the attackers." While Yako organized nurses for evacuation, I headed for my room. In the mattress, in a specially cut cavity, were components for improvised explosive devices that I had assembled from medical supplies over the past days. Not lethal, but powerful enough to divert attention and disable doors. With 3 such devices, I descended to the basement via the service staircase. As expected, the evacuation exit doors were locked with an electronic lock, and it wasn't possible to power it down. I installed the first device on the door hinges, directing the blast wave to minimize risk for people who would evacuate through this exit. The thunder of gunshots and screams from above intensified. I had little time left. After 10 minutes, the situation completely spiraled out of control. Kenji's men engaged in a firefight with Tanaka's people throughout the hospice grounds. Patients and staff were caught between 2 fires. I activated the first device. A muffled bang, and the evacuation exit doors collapsed. "This way," I shouted to Ayako, who was leading a group of 5 nurses and a dozen patients in wheelchairs. "Move through the tunnel to the boiler room. There should be an exit to the surface." "And you," fear read in her eyes. "I have unfinished business." 2 more nurses appeared from around the corner, accompanying a group of patients. "Go," I commanded. "I'll hold them back." When the last evacuees disappeared into the tunnel, I went up to the first floor. Chaos intensified. Yakuza from both factions were engaged in fierce firefight in the corridors. Glass shards, shell casings, and blood covered the floor. I made my way to the administrative wing. It was necessary to find Rhodes and Maria, who, I was sure, were trying to destroy all evidence of the criminal scheme. On the way, I encountered one of Kenji's fighters aiming at the back of a running nurse. Recognizing Ayako, I acted instantly. My lunge was lightning fast. Grab, turn, sharp movement, and his neck cracked under my hands. I picked up the dropped pistol. "Eric," Yako looked at me in horror. "I told you to leave." "I couldn't. There are people with katanas around the corner." Her voice trembled. I took her hand. "Stay close and do everything I say." Making our way through the firefight, I led Ayako to the kitchen, which remained a relatively safe zone. "Wait here," I pointed to a pantry with a heavy metal door. "Lock yourself in and don't open for anyone." Returning to the combat zone, I continued searching for Rhodes and Maria. Intuition suggested they would head for the server room, where all digital archives were stored. On the way, I discovered Tanaka not captured as I feared, but surrounded by 4 of his bodyguards, including the loyal Sato. He moved with surprising speed for his age, giving commands in Japanese. "Tanaka-san," I called out to him. "Ah, the former Marine," he nodded to me like an old acquaintance. "You did me a service and I am in your debt, but now I have my own business." "Are you looking for your wife?" "And her new, fancy, yes." "They're heading to the server room, in the basement east wing. That's where all the archives are." Tanaka gave a short order, and 3 guards disappeared in the indicated direction. He turned to me. "Weapon." I handed him the pistol I had picked up from the dead fighter. To my surprise, he declined. "I prefer something more personal." Sato extracted 2 traditional katanas from a long case and handed one to Tanaka. "Come," the old man smiled, and in this smile was something primeval and eerie. "Show us the way." The server room was located on the lower basement level, a massive room with rows of racks, blinking indicators, and humming cooling systems. We entered through a service entrance, passing 2 guard posts where Tanaka's people silently eliminated Kenji's fighters. Through the glass door, I saw Rhodes and Maria. They were frantically working with one of the server racks, extracting hard drives and putting them in a metal case. Next to them stood Mrs. Greer with an automatic pistol in hand, nervously looking around. How shall we proceed? I asked Tanaka. My people will take care of the woman with the weapon, he replied. You take the man and the wife. He paused. The wife is mine. At his signal, we simultaneously burst into the room. One of Tanaka's guards instantly neutralized Mrs. Greer with a precise shuriken throw. The second secured the perimeter. Rhodes pulled a pistol from under his coat, but I was already beside him. Kick to the wrist, grab, jerk, and he was on the floor, his weapon in my hands. Eric, his eyes widened in surprise. How? Thought I was dying. I hit him with the pistol handle, splitting his lip. Surprise. Maria froze with an external hard drive in her hands. Her gaze darted between me and Tanaka, who was slowly approaching, holding the katana as if it were an extension of his arm. Eric, she addressed me with a fake smile. A terrible misunderstanding has occurred. Everything's not what it seems, she backed away. It was Rhodes who forced me. Lies, I cut her off. Even now you continue to lie. In the depths of the room, I noticed a technical door leading to an adjacent compartment. Maria saw it too. She continued to move slowly in that direction. Give me the disc, I demanded. It's evidence of all the murders committed within these walls. And what will you do with it? She suddenly smirked. Go to the police. Do you think they'll believe you, a patient on medication, rather than a respected doctor and law-abiding wife? Give me the disc, I repeated, taking a step forward. Suddenly Rhodes, whom I held at gunpoint, pressed a hidden button under the table. A piercing siren filled the room, and water poured from the ceiling. The fire suppression flooding system activated. You're too late, shouted Rhodes through the noise of the water. All data will be destroyed. The water rapidly rose, reaching ankles, and electrical wiring began to spark. Tanaka-san, we need to leave. Sato grabbed his master by the shoulder. At that moment, Maria took advantage of the commotion, threw a chair at me, and rushed toward the technical door. Rhodes broke free from my grip and followed her. The disc, I shouted, rushing after them. Tanaka gestured for his people to retreat, but he himself moved after me. The water was already up to our knees, and electrical discharges were becoming more intense. Ahead, gunshots were heard. Rhodes had encountered Kenji's men, who were obviously also searching for the server room. I rushed forward along the flooded corridor. Rhodes stood surrounded by 3 of Kenji's fighters, pressing the metal case with discs to his chest. Noticing me, he shouted something in Japanese, and the fighters opened fire. I barely managed to take cover behind a concrete column. The water level continued to rise. The electrical wiring sparked more intensely, creating a deadly danger. I assessed the situation with the cool-headedness developed through years in special forces. To my right was a technical panel. Using the pistol handle, I broke it open and discovered electrical cables. Quickly connecting wires, I created a short circuit, and a powerful explosion destroyed one of the partitions, creating an escape route. In the chaos of the explosion and the water gushing from the breach, I rushed toward Rhodes. Kenji's fighters, disoriented, retreated. Rhodes tried to pull out a pistol but slipped in the water. The case fell from his hands, and the current carried it toward the breach. I dove, ignoring the pain from electrical discharges permeating the water. Grabbing the case handle, I lunged toward the hole in the wall, through which water was already gushing, creating a powerful flow into the adjacent room. The last thing I saw before the current swept me away, Maria and Rhodes running in the opposite direction, where they were met by Kenji's people. The flow carried me into some technical room filled with equipment. I struggled to get to an elevation, still clutching the case with hard drives, evidence of dozens of murders committed in Azure Haven. Somewhere in another part of the building, the firefight between Yakuza clans continued. But for me, the war was temporarily over. I had obtained what I came for. My phone vibrated in my pocket, a message from Ayako. Evacuated. All police in the county are heading your way. Where are you? I looked at the case in my hands, then at the raging water cutting off the way back. Looking for a way out, I have evidence. Wait outside. Police car sirens could already be heard in the distance. Yakuza from both factions would be trying to leave the territory before the authorities arrived. I needed to disappear too. With this evidence, I had become a target for too many people. I found a service staircase leading upward. The war between clans was just beginning, and I, against my will, had become part of it. But now I needed to do just one thing: survive to use the evidence obtained and stop the madness that had been happening within the walls of Azure Haven. Chapter 4. We spent the night in an abandoned motel on the outskirts of town. Exhausted, soaked to the skin, with a metal case handcuffed to my wrist, I looked like a fugitive criminal. In fact, that's what I was, at least from the law's perspective. Breaking through the police perimeter around Azure Haven, Ayako saved me literally from under the nose of the SWAT team, driving a car to the service exit. I stumbled out of the hospice doors just as police began a major assault on the building. The last thing I saw in the rearview mirror was Tanaka surrounded by his men, calmly surrendering to authorities like a law-abiding citizen who happened to be a victim of an attack. I can imagine the expression on the police officers' faces when they learned who exactly they had detained, and their even greater surprise when, an hour later, his lawyers secured his immediate release. Morning news was filled with headlines about a bloody massacre at an elite hospice and war between Japanese groups on U.S. territory. There wasn't a word about surviving patients and medical experiments. Apparently, someone had taken care of controlling the information. The phone rang exactly at 8:00 a.m. Number hidden, but I knew who it was. "You have my evidence, I have your enemies," Tanaka's voice said without any greeting. "Time to finish what we started." He named an address in the mountains and a meeting time. Then, without pause, "I'll send a car, don't worry about surveillance." The line cut off. Ayako looked at me with concern. Over the past night, a strange, almost unnatural closeness had developed between us, people who had survived a catastrophe together. She had treated my wounds. I had told her the full version of the story. "It's the Yakuza," she whispered. "You don't understand what you're getting into." "I do," I kissed her forehead. "That's exactly why you'll stay here." "No, Listen," I squeezed her shoulders. "You saved dozens of lives yesterday. That's more than many accomplish in a lifetime. But now a game begins that you can't exit. Yamamoto's people will look for witnesses. You need to disappear." I took one of the hard drives from the case, a duplicate containing the main evidence. "If something happens to me, send this to the FBI. Only if something happens to me," I emphasized. "Otherwise, they'll come for you." As a farewell, she whispered a prayer in Japanese. I didn't understand the words, but the intonation was clearly protective. A black SUV with tinted windows arrived exactly at the appointed time. Behind the wheel sat a silent Japanese man with a face as if carved from stone. He didn't utter a word throughout the journey, only once searching me for weapons and bugs, finding only the case with discs. The mountain journey took 3 hours. We zigzagged along secondary roads, changed direction several times, checking for surveillance. Finally, the car turned onto a private road leading deep into the forest. After a mile, massive gates in traditional Japanese style appeared, with armed guards standing on either side. "Tanaka Ryosuke," the driver said with reverence, and the gates swung open. Tanaka's estate impressed with its scale and beauty. A winding road climbed up the mountainside, surrounded by ancient trees. Along the way, I noticed several camouflaged guard posts and surveillance cameras skillfully integrated into the landscape. At the hilltop stood a traditional Japanese estate, an extensive complex of buildings in feudal style, surrounded by well-kept gardens. The central house greeted me with absolute silence, broken only by the soft sound of a bamboo fountain in the inner courtyard. Sato, Tanaka's faithful bodyguard, waited at the entrance. "The master awaits you in the tea house," he said with a slight bow, "but first you must see something." We passed through a series of rooms decorated with minimalist elegance, rice paper, dark wood, calligraphic scrolls on the walls. In the last room, Sato slid a panel, revealing a descent to an underground level. What I saw below resembled a high-tech command center: monitors, surveillance systems, communication equipment. On the main screen, an image from a drone was being transmitted, a luxurious coastal estate with a view of the ocean. "Yamamoto's refuge," Sato explained. "We discovered them 4 hours ago." On other screens, I saw thermal images of people inside the house. In the central room sat 4 individuals, their silhouettes outlined in red. "Target objects confirmed," said one of the operators. "Visual identification: Kenji Yamamoto, Sumiko Tanaka, Alexander Rhodes, and Maria Stone." I moved closer, peering at the blurred thermal contours. They were feasting as if celebrating victory. Champagne glasses, embraces, laughter, confident in their safety, confident they had escaped. "When?" I asked Sato. "Tonight. Master Tanaka wants you to participate in the operation." I was escorted to another room where tactical equipment lay on a long table: black clothing, night vision devices, communication equipment, and weapons, both modern and ancient. "Choose what's familiar to you," said Sato. "You were an assault trooper, weren't you?" I touched familiar items: tactical belt, load-bearing vest, silenced pistol, with a feeling of returning home. My body remembered every movement, every gesture of a professional soldier. But alongside modern equipment lay traditional ninja weapons: shurikens, throwing knives, garrots. "Master Tanaka believes that sometimes ancient methods are more effective than modern ones," Sato explained, noticing my interest. "Especially when it comes to justice." Justice, a strange word in the mouth of a professional killer. But I was beginning to understand that for Tanaka and his people, this concept had a special, ritual meaning. When I completed my preparations, I was escorted to the tea house, a small structure deep in the garden, surrounded by flowering cherry trees. Tanaka sat on tatami before a low table where cups of green tea steamed. To my surprise, he looked completely healthy. The sickly pallor had disappeared. His movements became precise and confident, his gaze sharp. Before me sat not a dying old man, but a dangerous predator temporarily assuming the guise of a sage. "Toxins eliminated from the body," he explained, noticing my surprise. "The body remembers strength even when the mind forgets." He gestured for me to sit opposite him. "Tonight we restore balance," he said, pouring tea. "Are you ready to participate?" "I'm ready to finish what I started." Tanaka barely noticeably smiled. "That's a warrior's reason, not a philosopher's, but it will suffice for tonight." The aerobot lowered us onto the roof of Yamamoto's mansion at 2:13 in the morning, the time when the human organism is at its lowest point in the circadian rhythm. The guards were neutralized silently: darts with tranquilizers, garrots, hand-to-hand combat techniques. No gunshots, no noise. Our group split into 3 squads. The first, under Sato's command, blocked all exits. The second, led by a gray-haired veteran named Takeshi, disabled security and communication systems. The third, consisting of me and 2 young Tanaka fighters, was to capture the targets. I moved like a ghost through the corridors of the house, using all the skills acquired during years of special operations. The night vision device showed thermal signatures of people through walls: 4 figures in the main bedroom on the 2nd floor. Judging by their poses and movements, 2 were sleeping, 2 were awake. We synchronized the attack on signal: smoke grenades with a mild sedative effect through ventilation, simultaneous penetration through windows and doors. The targets had not a second for reaction. When I burst into the bedroom, Maria and Rhodes were asleep in an enormous bed, while Kenji and Sumiko quietly conversed in armchairs by an open bar. A pistol lay on the table between them, but Yamamoto didn't even manage to reach for it. A miniature dart pierced his neck, instantly paralyzing his body but leaving his consciousness clear. Sumiko tried to scream, but my hand was already covering her mouth. "Quiet," I whispered in English. "If you want to live, don't make a sound." Her eyes widened when she recognized me. There was no fear in them, only cold fury and something resembling respect. Rhodes and Maria were awakened much less delicately. They were dragged from the bed onto the floor, bound and gagged. Maria, even in this situation, managed to look offended, as if the rude awakening was the worst of what awaited her that night. "Operation completed," I reported over the radio. "Objects captured, casualties 0. "Acknowledged," replied Tanaka's voice. "Transport them to the evacuation point." 15 minutes later, a helicopter without identification marks landed on the beach behind the house. The prisoners, bound and with bags over their heads, were loaded into the cargo compartment. I sat next to Maria, watching her chest rise and fall rapidly and unevenly in attempts to cope with panic. "Don't be afraid," I said, knowing she could hear me through the bag. "Death won't be quick." It was cruel, but I wanted her to feel at least a drop of the horror experienced by the victims of their scheme, slowly dying in Azure Haven. The return flight to Tanaka's estate took less than an hour. All this time I pondered the strange turn of fate that had brought me here. Just a week ago, I considered myself dying, prepared to meet the end alone. Now I was participating in the kidnapping and probably subsequent execution of 4 people, including my own wife. What made me better than them? Only that I wasn't acting out of self-interest, or that they deserved retribution for their crimes. The helicopter landed on a pad deep within Tanaka's estate. We were greeted by the master himself, now dressed in a traditional kimono, with 2 swords at his belt. "Welcome to Mountain Refuge," he said as the prisoners were unloaded from the helicopter. "Here everything will begin anew." I was escorted to a guest house, a small but elegant structure in traditional style. Inside awaited clean clothes, spacious hakama, and an upper kimono of dark silk, and a hot bath. "Master Tanaka asks you to cleanse yourself and rest," said a servant. "The ceremony begins at dawn." Immersed in hot water, I felt the tension of recent days slowly releasing from my muscles. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to simply be, not plan, not analyze, not prepare for the worst. When I closed my eyes, what appeared before my inner vision were not war nightmares, not Maria's betrayal, but Ayako's face, calm, trusting, full of light that had been so lacking in my life. At dawn, I was awakened by a soft knock at the door. Sato came to escort me to the main house. "Master Tanaka awaits you in the dojo," he said. We walked through gardens shrouded in morning mist to an ancient structure of dark wood. Inside the dojo, the floor was covered with traditional tatami, walls adorned with calligraphic scrolls and weapons from different epochs. In the center was a small platform. Tanaka sat in the traditional seiza position, dressed in ceremonial black kimono with his clan's crest on the back. Next to him on cushions sat the elders, gray-haired, stern men with faces marked by time and experience. I was led to a cushion opposite Tanaka. I sat down, trying to imitate his posture, though the unaccustomed position of my legs caused discomfort. "Today we conduct the ancient ritual of honor cleansing," Tanaka said in impeccable English. "In your culture, this might be called a trial, but that's not quite correct. A trial separates the guilty from the punishment. Our ritual unites them." He made a sign, and the dojo doors swung open. The prisoners were led in one by one, each under escort of 2 guards. They had been changed into white hakama without belts, clothing symbolizing the transitional state between life and death. Each will be given an opportunity to recognize their crimes, continued Tanaka, and each will be offered redemption through suffering. The prisoners were seated on their knees in a row, facing the elders. I noticed that only Sumiko maintained dignity in this position. The others looked awkward and tense. We shall begin, Tanaka nodded to his people. Rhodes was chosen first for cleansing. 4 warriors in traditional clothes led him to the center of the dojo, where a strange wooden construction resembling a medical stand had already been set up. This is a prop from Kabuki theater, Tanaka explained, noticing my confusion. For torture scenes in historical plays, today it will serve its original purpose. Rhodes was tied to the construction in a standing position, hands and feet fixed, head held immobile by a special device. Next to it, they installed a modern medical stand with IVs and monitors. Tanaka rose and approached him. In his hands, he held a tablet with a long list. Dr. Alexander Rhodes, his voice sounded formal, almost detached. You swore to do no harm, but became the cause of so many deaths that your name deserves a place alongside history's worst murderers. Rhodes tried to say something, but the gag in his mouth turned words into inarticulate mumbling. Now I will read the names of those you killed with your medications, continued Tanaka, and for each name, you will receive a dose of the same drugs you used to poison your victims. He nodded, and a man in a white coat, apparently the clan's personal physician, connected Rhodes to an IV. Herbert Wilson, 67 years old, diagnosed with non-existent brain cancer, date of death, March 15, 2022. Rhodes jerked when clear liquid flowed through the tube into his vein. Elizabeth Chang, 72 years old, diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, date of death, April 30, 2022. Another drop. Rhodes' body began to twitch, sweat breaking out on his forehead. Thomas Brennan, 65 years old, diagnosed with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, date of death, May 18, 2022. With each name, and there were dozens, Rhodes' condition worsened. First came tremors, then twitches turning into convulsions. His eyes sometimes rolled back, sometimes widened in horror. Saliva dripped from his mouth, his body shook with tremors. I observed this with mixed feelings. Part of me, a soldier who had seen too much death, dispassionately evaluated what was happening as just retribution. Another part, a man raised in Western legal traditions, experienced deep inner discomfort. Tanaka seemed to notice my state. In your culture, this appears barbaric, he said quietly. But consider, wasn't what he did to his victims more cruel? They died for weeks, months, not understanding what was happening, mourning the life they could still have lived. He receives a concentrated experience of his evildoings. This isn't cruelty, it's justice in its purest form. I didn't answer, but I understood his logic, though I couldn't fully accept it. Western justice had moved too far from the physical dimension of crime, had become too abstract. In cold prison cells, criminals rarely confronted the real essence of the evil they had committed. When the list was fully read, 127 names, Rhodes was in a semi-conscious state. His skin had acquired a yellowish tint, his eyes were sunken, his body shaken by uncontrollable tremors. He had experienced in himself the symptoms of all the diseases he had fabricated. Take him away, Tanaka commanded. Let him spend the night reflecting on the choices he made. The semi-conscious Rhodes was carried out of the dojo. In his eyes, I saw something I had never observed before: absolute understanding of the evil he had done. Continuation of the reckoning awaited him tomorrow. The next day, 2 transparent glass cages were brought into the dojo, installed side by side on the platform. They resembled aquariums, large enough to hold an adult, but not allowing one to lie down or properly sit. Maria and Rhodes, pale from yesterday, were placed in these cages, each in their own. Pipes were connected to the tops of the cages, and valves were arranged in the ceiling. This ritual is called Choice of Truth, Tanaka explained, returning to his place. Each person must make a choice, save themselves or the one they supposedly love. He nodded, and one of the guards removed the gag from Maria's lips. "This is illegal," was the first thing she shouted. "You'll all answer for kidnapping and—" "Silence," Tanaka said quietly, and there was such force in his voice that Maria fell silent mid-sentence. "The rules are simple. Each victim's name you mention gives you a chance at salvation. The water in your cage will recede, but with each name a bamboo stake will fall into your partner's cage." He pointed to the ceiling above Rhodes' cage, where sharp bamboo stakes were visible, held by a mechanism. "The choice is yours," Tanaka concluded. In Maria's cage, a valve opened, and water began to slowly fill the space, rising to her ankles. "You're insane," she screamed, panic breaking through her usual mask of self-control. "I know nothing about the victims." "A strange claim for someone who selected them from insurance documents," Tanaka remarked. "Perhaps refresh your memory." He turned the tablet, showing Maria a document with her signature, a list of potential clients for Azure Haven with detailed financial data. The water rose, already reaching her knees. Maria cast a desperate glance at Rhodes, but he maintained a stone expression, staring at one point in front of him. "Richard Hodgson," she suddenly shouted. "Oil tycoon from Texas, 12 million insurance." The valve above her cage closed and the water level slightly receded. Simultaneously from the mechanism above Rhodes' cage, a thin bamboo stake fell, piercing his shoulder. He made no sound, only jerked from the pain. "Arthur Westmoreland, banker, 15 million insurance." Another stake fell, piercing Rhodes' forearm. He continued to remain silent, but his eyes betrayed increasing pain. Maria looked at him, then at the water that had begun rising again, and something changed in her face. The mask finally fell away, revealing her true essence, cold, calculating selfishness. "Garrett Clayton, federal judge, 10 million. Eleanor Price, media mogul's widow, 18 million. Charles Davenport, industrialist, 20 million. With each name, stakes fell one after another, turning the doctor's body into something resembling a porcupine. Blood ran down the bamboo, coloring the cage floor crimson. But he didn't beg for mercy, didn't ask her to stop, just looked at Maria with an expression gradually shifting from shock to understanding. Understanding betrayal, the worst pain of all. Maria continued listing names, one after another, without hesitation, without remorse. Names of people sent to death for money. Her memory proved phenomenal. She remembered not only surnames but also insurance amounts and death dates. When the list was exhausted, 57 more names, the water in her cage had lowered to her ankles, and Rhodes presented a gruesome sight. Wounded, bleeding, but still alive and conscious. "Interesting," said Tanaka. "You didn't hesitate for a second, sacrificing the man with whom you planned to spend your life after murdering your husband." Maria looked at him with unexpected directness. "I never planned to spend my life with him. He was a tool like everyone else." Rhodes made a guttural sound, not quite a groan, not quite a chuckle. "And you were a bad tool," he pronounced with difficulty. "Unreliable." Tanaka nodded, as if receiving confirmation of a long-held theory. "Take both away. We've learned all we need." As they were carried out, the bloodied Rhodes and the trembling but unharmed Maria, I caught my former wife's gaze. In it was neither remorse nor fear, only cold calculation. Even now, she was assessing chances, seeking a way out, considering options. I realized I had never truly known this woman. Sumiko Tanaka, the Yakuza boss's wife, the adulteress, was the last to appear before the Council of Elders. Unlike the others, she carried herself with dignity that neither captivity nor humiliating clothing could conceal. She was led to the center of the dojo and seated on her knees on a special mat. To my surprise, Hideo Tanaka rose and left his place, yielding the chairmanship to the eldest council member. For this ritual, Master Tanaka cannot be judge, Sato explained to me in a quiet voice. A husband does not judge his wife. It is clan law. The elder, dry, with skin resembling parchment, but with piercing, energy-filled eyes, spoke in Japanese. Sato translated for me. Sumiko Tanaka, born Ikigawa, today you stand before the council not as the wife of the clan head, but as a betrayer of blood and honor. Your crime is that you broke sacred vows and plotted the death of your husband, master, and clan head. Sumiko answered in Japanese, her voice sounding calm and melodious. She says she acted in the clan's interests, Sato translated. That Master Tanaka had become too old and conservative for the modern world, that his adherence to traditions was leading the clan to decline. The elder shook his head. If you see deficiencies in the leader, a wife's duty is to point them out and help correct them. A clan member's duty is to express their opinion at council. An honorable person's duty is to accept a challenge openly. But you chose the spider's path, poison, darkness, and betrayal. Sumiko said something, her tone became harsher, her eyes narrowed. She says that in the Yakuza world there's no longer place for samurai, Sato translated. That those who know how to adapt survive. That women have always been men's shadows, and only through deception could they gain the power they deserved. The elder listened without interrupting, then nodded, as if hearing exactly what he expected. The council has made its decision, he said. Sumiko Tanaka no longer exists for the clan. The exclusion ceremony will take place now. At his signal, clan members entered the dojo, more than 20 men and several women of different ages. Each carried a piece of white cloth. One by one, they approached Sumiko, cut a piece of cloth with a special knife, and threw it into a bronze bowl standing before her. The cloth in the bowl was set on fire, and thin smoke rose to the ceiling. Symbolic destruction of all ties, Sato explained. After this, Sumiko ceases to exist as a person for the clan. Her name will never be spoken, her images will be destroyed, memory of her will be erased. To my surprise, Hideo Tanaka himself did not participate in the ceremony. He stood apart, observing with a face devoid of any expression. When the fire in the bowl burned out, Sumiko was raised to her feet and led from the dojo. Her face remained impassive, but in her eyes I caught something resembling fear, the first sign of emotion she had allowed herself to show. "Where are they taking her?" I asked Sato. "To the meditation grave," he replied. "A traditional place where traitors spend their last days, reflecting on their crimes. A small pit in the ground, covered with a grate, with minimal access to air and water." "How long will she spend there?" "As long as her soul needs for purification. Perhaps a day, perhaps a week, perhaps forever. Master Tanaka will decide." When the ceremony concluded, I noticed that Tanaka had disappeared. He was neither in the dojo nor in the main house. "He has ascended the mountain," said Sato, noticing my search, "for meditation, and asked you to join him at dawn." The mountain path leading to the summit appeared ancient, stones forming steps had been smoothed by centuries of footsteps. I climbed in the pre-dawn twilight, feeling a strange tranquility. After everything experienced in recent days, betrayal, mortal danger, cruelty, this ascent seemed purifying. Tanaka waited on a flat platform that offered a view of the valley, his estate, and the mountain range in the distance. He sat in a meditation posture, facing east, where the sky was already beginning to lighten. I sat beside him, maintaining silence. For some time, we simply watched as the first rays of sun touched the mountaintops, gradually descending into the valley, coloring everything in golden and pink hues. "Beautiful," I finally said. "Each sunrise is a reminder," Tanaka replied, "that even the longest night ends, and that each beginning contains within itself an end." He turned to me. "What do you plan to do next, Eric Stone?" I pondered. This question hadn't occurred to me in the chaos of recent days. The evidence of Azure Haven crimes. It should become public knowledge. Should it? Tanaka looked at me intently. Consider the consequences. A public scandal. An investigation that will affect hundreds of people, including surviving patients and their families. Years of court proceedings where victims will have to relive their traumas again and again. And what's the result? Rhodes and your wife receive prison terms. Is that justice? I was silent, considering his words. There is another way, continued Tanaka. My people have already identified all victims of the scheme. We can return the stolen money to their families, anonymously, through a series of funds and trusts. We can provide medical care for those who survived, and we can guarantee that the guilty will never harm another living soul. It's not legal, I remarked. Justice is not always law, Tanaka replied. Sometimes it's balance. He took from the folds of his kimono a small object wrapped in silk cloth. Unwrapping it, he showed me an ancient dagger in lacquered sheath, inlaid with mother-of-pearl. This kaikin has belonged to my family for 400 years. The women of the clan carried it to protect their honor. He extended the dagger to me. Now it's yours. Why? I hesitated to take the relic. Because you understand the price of honor and the pain of balance. You're a Western man, but your soul is familiar with Eastern concepts of duty and justice. He placed the dagger in my hands. This is not just a weapon. It's a symbol of responsibility. Each rupture requires reunion, each disruption of balance, restoration. I accepted the dagger, feeling a strange weight that seemed to emanate not from metal and wood, but from centuries of history and tradition. And what will happen to Maria? I asked. She received a lesson. Now the choice is theirs, Tanaka shrugged. Your wife, she is lost to herself. Her punishment is to be herself until the end of her days. The sun rose above the horizon, flooding the valley with light. Tanaka stood, leaning on his cane, again an old man, but filled with an inner strength that seemed to flow from the earth itself. I have a proposition, he said. I need a man who understands both worlds, East and West, violence and mercy, law and justice. A man who can become a bridge. I looked at the rising sun, feeling something inside me, long frozen, beginning to thaw. Life, which I had considered over, received a new beginning. The hourglass had flipped. I'll think about your proposition, I replied, standing beside him. Tanaka smiled, for the first time truly sincerely. Good, contemplation is the beginning of wisdom. We began our descent along the ancient path. With each step, the past remained behind, and the future, undefined but full of possibilities, unfolded before me like a scroll with a yet unwritten story. Justice is not always law. Sometimes it's balance. These words of Tanaka's echoed in my head, and I understood that they would become a compass in the new life I was about to build. The world, like myself, had changed irreversibly. If you enjoyed this story, please support the author with a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your emotions in the comments. Thank you.